Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the 8th meeting in 2020 of the SPPA Committee. Agenda item 1, our first item of business, is for the committee to decide whether to take item 4 in private. Do members agree to take item 4 in private at a future meeting? Thank you very much. And agenda item 2 is for the committee to decide whether its consideration of a committee bill to amend the process for complaints against MSPs should be taken in private at future meetings. Do members agree to take this item in private at future meetings? Thank you very much. Okay, so we come to agenda item 3, and this is stage 2 proceedings on the Scottish Elections Reform Bill. So I've got quite a considerable amount to go through here before we reach the real meat of the thing, so if you'll bear with me. I welcome Graham Day, Minister for Parliamentary Business and Veterans, and his accompanying officials. Thank you. I would highlight that officials are not permitted to speak on the record during formal proceedings. We also welcome Jeremy Balfour, who has lodged amendments to the bill to the meeting. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, members might find it helpful to have a reminder of the stage 2 process. Everyone should have a copy of the bill as introduced, the marshalled list of amendments, and which sets out the amendments in the order in which they will be disposed of and the groupings. There will be one debate for each group of amendments. I will call the member who lodged the first amendment in the group to speak to, move that amendment and speak to all the other amendments in the group. I will then call all other members who have lodged amendments in the group to speak to their amendments and to others in the group, but not at that time to move their amendments. Members who have not lodged amendments in the group but who wish to speak should indicate to me or the clerk, and we will make sure that you are called. If the Minister has not already spoken on the group, I will invite him to contribute to the debate just before we move to the winding up speech. The debate on each group will be concluded by me inviting the member who moved the first amendment in the group to wind up. Following the debate on the group, I will check whether the amendment who moved the first amendment in the group wishes to press it to a vote or to seek to withdraw it. If the member wishes to press it, I will put the question on the amendment. If the member wishes to withdraw it, I will ask whether any member objects to that. If any member objects, the amendment is not withdrawn and the committee must immediately move to a vote on it. If any member does not wish to move their amendment when it is called, they should say not moved and do so audibly. Any other member who is present may move the amendment. However, if no one moves the amendment, I will immediately call the next amendment on the marshalled list. Only committee members are allowed to vote. Voting in divisions is by a show of hands. It is important that members keep their hands clearly raised until the clerks have recorded their vote. The committee is required to indicate formally that it has considered and agreed to each section of the bill, so I will put a question on each section at the appropriate point. I also want to say at the outset that if we have any tied votes on any amendments, I will, as convener, vote as I voted in the division. I will do that consistently throughout the process. Now, I hope that's clear to everybody. So I will now move to the first group, and the first group is, there we go, is questions, thank you, it's too much, jumping from one place to another. The question is that sections 1 to 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we move straight on to section 4. Local electoral wards and the number of councillors. So I call Amendment 22 in the name of Mark Ruskell, grouped with Amendment 23. Mark Ruskell to move Amendment 22 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
Right, thanks, convener. Good morning, everybody. So Amendment 22 in my name. It's quite a simple amendment. Effectively, it removes the discretion of Boundaries Scotland to recommend a 2-member ward. It retains the ability of Boundaries Scotland to recommend in their boundary reviews a 3, a 4 or a 5-member ward, but it does remove the ability for them to recommend a 2-member ward. And really this is reflecting on some of the contributions that were made at the stage 1 debate, where I think there was quite broad cross-party concern about the impact of a more widespread use of 2-member wards on proportionality. I think going back to the evidence that we took at stage 1, the Minister was clear that unfortunately in regards to this provision there had been no impact assessment on the impact on proportionality of introducing two-member wards, which was a bit surprising and a bit disappointing. I should point out that this amendment does not affect Section 1 of the Local Governance Act 2004, which was amended by and pertains to the Islands Act. So if members will remember, the Islands Act introduced the ability to select boundaries of different boundaries which had one or two member wards serving them, and I think there were very special geographic circumstances around the argument for that, which I totally respect. And this amendment's been drafted in a way that it doesn't affect that provision, which is specifically in relation to islands. I'm still struggling really to understand under what circumstances in a mainland situation where a two-member ward would be appropriate. And I don't know, maybe the Minister's got examples of that, you can convince me otherwise. In relation to Amendment 23 from the Minister, I appreciate, I think, where he's coming from here. I think it's an attempt to try and sort of pin down those circumstances whereby a two-member ward would be appropriate a little more. However, I had a look at the 1973 Act and the Schedule 6, and it doesn't really offer any more guidance, to be honest. I mean, there's a general rule in there that electoral wards should have, as a rule of thumb, equal numbers of electors within each of those wards. That can be overridden under special geographic considerations. But what are those special geographic considerations? It doesn't really give us, it doesn't give me much comfort in relation to how a two-member ward would be selected and what those special geographic considerations might be in that circumstance. So yeah, so I think I'll leave it there and listen with interest as to what the Minister has to say on this, really.
Yep.
I move the amendment.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Okay, that was Mark Ruskell on moving Amendment 22. Minister, please, could you speak to Amendment 23 and other amendments in the group?
Good morning, Convener, and thank you. The Amendments 22 and 23 are both concerned with the multi-member wards and local government electoral areas. The bill, as it's introduced, seeks to allow 2- and 5-member wards, and that's to permit greater flexibility in relation to specific local circumstances. The Parliament has already legislated to allow 1- and 2-member wards in island areas, as we heard, and the bill's provisions build on that by allowing the Local Government Boundary Commission to tailor its proposals to take account of local circumstance and geographical considerations. Mark Ruskell's Amendment 22 seeks to remove 2-member wards as an option in any circumstance. I would suggest that's going too far, as the option of 2-member wards gives the Boundary Commission the flexibility which is needed in order to best adapt to individual communities with special circumstances. And our approach, which is welcomed by the committee, also had 70% of those responding to the relevant question in our consultation exercise indicating support. A 2-member ward allows the Boundary Commission to reflect the geographical or historical distinctiveness of a smaller community and avoids them being obliged to shoehorn a smaller community into a larger one, for example, on the other side of a body of water or a mountain range. I also would observe, Convener, that Mr Ruskell's amendment does not take proper account of the Island Scotland Act 2018, with the end result that an island community could be included in a 1- or 3-member ward, but not a 2-member ward. That would be prohibited. I'm sure that was not his intention. He's indicated that, but it is what the amendment achieves. And that's another reason why I would recommend against Amendment 22. All of that said, I fully understand the concern that 2-member wards should not be overused. So I've prepared Amendment 23 following discussions with Adam Tompkins, who aired this issue in the Stage 1 debate. That amendment highlights the existing duty, as Mark Ruskell has indicated, on the Boundary Commission to balance the need to ensure parity in relation to the number of councillors per voter within a local government area, with the need to respect any special geographical considerations. Now, I appreciate that some members might like to go further and more actively constrain the use of 2-member wards, but it should also be borne in mind here that the bill is also strengthening parliamentary oversight of the Boundary Commission and that proposals from the Commission which would abolish or alter the boundaries of a local government or electoral ward will have to be approved by Parliament by the affirmative procedure. Now, we've considered whether an exceptional circumstances test could be adopted for the use of 2 or also 5-member wards, but there are a number of tricky issues in reaching a satisfactory test without undermining the Commission's discretion. Ronnie Hines, the Chair of the Commission, has written to me to indicate that restricting the use of 2 or 5-member wards would limit the Commission's ability to meet the aspirations of councils and communities to strike an optimal balance between parity and the other factors they're obliged to consider. He's also suggested that any implications for proportionality would be better considered as part of any future review of the multi-member ward system, and noted that the likely date for the first proposal for a 2-member ward, other than for an island community, would not be until 2026. Now, I'd be happy to discuss this issue further with interested members and with the Commission ahead of stage 3. However, Amendment 22 would remove the Boundary Commission's ability to propose 2-member wards altogether, and would remove the ability of 2-member wards for island areas, which was agreed by this Parliament in Section 19 of the Scotland Act 2018. I would therefore ask Mark Ruskell not to move Amendment 22, but if pressed to a vote, I would ask members to reject Amendment 22. I urge members to support Amendment 23 as it emphasises the importance of the existing tests in place in relation to proposals made by the Boundary Commission for the design of local government electoral wards.
Minister, can we have Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, please?
Thank you very much, Convener. Just taking on board, I agree with much of what the Minister has said, and also I'm glad he highlighted the comments of Adam Tompkins, my colleague Adam Tompkins, in the debate. I can see what the member and what Mark Ruskell is trying to do here, and I recognise that there will be many areas where this simply wouldn't be suitable. I would just simply remind him that there are parts of the Highland areas and wards in the Highland areas which are one ward is larger than the entirety of the central belt of Scotland. I think it's not just an issue for island communities disparity. I think there are other areas in the Highland that the flexibility, should the Boundary Commission suggest it, should be there, and so I won't be supporting his amendment.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And any other members? Yes, Neil Finlay, please.
I think, on balance, I think I agree with the position put by the Minister, but it does seem quite odd that I think if we accepted Mark Ruskell's amendment, we would be able to have wards of 1, wards of 3, 4 and 5, up to 5, is it, I think, but not 2. So it's just twoism. It seems to be that there's it just doesn't make any sense to me, the logic of that. So I would approve the position that has been put by the Minister.
Okay, thank you very much. So Mark Ruskell, to wind up, please.
I think it's perhaps a bit of misunderstanding on the part of Mr Finlay here. The drafting of this amendment ensures that the provisions that are within the Islands Bill still apply. So it would still be possible to have 1- and 2-member wards, but explicitly within the context of the Islands Bill. Now, the Minister suggests there's a difference of opinion there. I mean, I've had legal advice to suggest that's not the case. We could take this out of the room and discuss it, ahead of stage 3. I mean, I think there's still a weakness around special geographic considerations. I mean, the Minister mentions bodies of water, mountains, etc. There's the other provisions around there has to be a link to a community. I mean, I think what would make sense is that if the Boundary Scotland were to bring forward an amendment like this, that there would be some statement that relates to the individual decision that Parliament could then scrutinise, because it's impossible to generalise in these situations. Mr Halcrow-Johnson's point about Highland wards, I mean, I live in an area, council ward pretty much the size of Luxembourg, has 3 members, but it's difficult to generalise that into the kind of context that a 2-member ward might be appropriate to be selected under. So I feel there's something still missing in here. The 73 Act Schedule 6 doesn't really give us much of a clue as to how these 2-member wards would be applied. And I think if the Minister was minded to continue this discussion with a view to perhaps strengthening the consideration of this in some way, then I'd be prepared to not move this amendment at this point. but he appears to be nodding, but I don't know. He is nodding, great. Okay.
Can I ask
He's
Mark
helped
Ruskell?
to make up my mind then.
Can I ask Mark Ruskell if you'd like to press or withdraw, please?
I'm going to withdraw.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Okay, Mark Ruskell seeks to withdraw amendment number 22. Does any member object to this? They don't. So if no member has object, then amendment 22 is withdrawn. Okay, and thank you very much. We're moving on now to calling amendment 23 in the name of the Minister. That's already been debated with amendment 22. Minister, to move formally.
I will indeed, if I can just clarify, I'm quite prepared to take that issue away and look at it around the possibility of an explanation to accompany any proposal for a two-member ward, and we can continue that dialogue to stage 3. So I move the amendment in my name.
Right, well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. The question is that amendment 23 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Okay, that then leads us to the question is that section 4 in total be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And also the question is that section 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. So we're calling amendment 4 in the name of the Minister, grouped with amendment 5. Minister, to move amendment 4 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
Convener, I think I've been clear throughout the passage of the bill that the Government is committed to listening and responding to ideas and concerns designed to improve the electoral system. I'm grateful for the perspectives and the suggestions that have been offered by those around this table and beyond. Amendments 4 and 5 adopt the suggestion made by the Electoral Commission in its Stage 1 evidence. The Commission is already a key player in our elections, and other innovations in this bill reinforce its role within Scotland. Members will recall that the Commission suggested in its evidence that it was keen to play a formal part in evaluating pilot schemes in local government elections. And as we'll discuss in relation to Mr Balfour's amendments in the next grouping, we already have a robust system for trialling improvements to the electoral process as set out in Section 5 of the Scottish Local Government Elections Act 2002. That section allows local authorities to propose pilots on a number of topics, including voting methods and electoral communications. The Scottish ministers consider these proposals, which, if agreed, are laid before the Parliament for approval. At present, local authorities are obliged to evaluate the completed pilot and publish a report. I agree with the Electoral Commission's suggestion that this evaluation role is best suited to the Commission's independent expertise. It's a role that they already perform for pilots in England and Wales, and they have previously provided a similar service on an informal basis in Scotland. That the Electoral Commission were not given this function in the first place appears simply to have been the result of it not being fully established at the time of the 2002 Act. Amendment 5 seeks to transfer statutory evaluation role from local authorities to the Electoral Commission. It will also reduce the workload for local authorities in relation to pilots, allowing them to focus on the practicalities of designing and delivering these. The amendment also recognises, Convener, the important contribution that can be made by stakeholders like RNIB Scotland, with the provisions encouraging the Electoral Commission to consult as it considers appropriate. Amendment 4 makes a consequential change needed as a result of Amendment 5, amending the 2002 Act. Convener, I move Amendment 4 and I ask members to support Amendments 4 and 5.
Thank you very much, Minister. Any members have anything they'd like to contribute? Yes, Mark.
It's just a question, really, Convener. It's just about whether there'd been any consultation with COSLA on this, because it is a shift, isn't it, to powers of the Electoral Commission.
There has been some contact with COSLA on this, and that will be an ongoing process.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much then. Minister, would you care to wind up any more? Is it?
Nothing further, Convener.
Nothing further to add, thank you. The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. And call Amendment 5 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 4. Minister, to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the question is that Amendment 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And the question is that Section 6 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. Okay. So, calling Amendment 1 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, please, grouped with Amendments 2 and 3. Jeremy Balfour to move Amendment 1 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. It is a basic aspiration of all voters to be able to vote independently and in secret. This not only affords the appropriate respect and equality of treatment to each voter, but also preserves a fundamental principle of our democratic system that the ballot is secret. Often there is insufficient appreciation of the importance of the secrecy of the ballot. It is vital and a foundational principle which prevents voters from being threatened or rewarded for voting in a particular way. If your vote is secret, then there is no evidence on which to pursue punishment or reward. 3/4 of people with sight loss surveyed by RNIB reported that they could not vote independently or in secret at the 2017 general election, and similar reports were received following the 2019 general election. Currently, there are 2 voting aids available to blind and partially sighted people in polling stations, a large print ballot paper and tactile voting device. The need to ensure no ballot paper is different in a way that could identify the voter means that a larger print ballot paper can only be used as a guide for the standard ballot paper, not as a replacement. The tactile voting device, TVD, had been a subject to a High Court decision down in England, which found that it alone was not sufficient to enable voters who are blind or partially sighted to vote without any need of assistance for the presiding officer or any companion. Use of either voting aid can result in having to show your vote to another person to be confident that you have voted for the person and party you would like to win that particular seat or region. I believe it is important that the Scottish Government explore alternative voting methods, including electrical voting that would enable people with sight loss to vote independently and in secret. Section 6 of the bill removes barriers in the current primary legislation that could limit or prevent future trials of electric voting at local government elections. My amendment recognises that the government, I think, are on a journey for this, and I recognise the work that has been done already. But my concern is that it is only a duty and there is no timescale involved in how long it will take to evaluate any of this work. The amendment places the duty on Scottish ministers, but does give them flexibility to delegate those functions to local authorities and to others if appropriate. If the amendment is passed, it would support efforts to adapt the voting system so that blind and partially sighted voters can vote in secret like everyone else in our country. Amendment 2, Convener, requires the Electoral Commission to issue guidance to returning officers on their existing duty by specifying this should include and permitting the use of such tools as mobile phones or magnifiers. Again, I understand that at the last general election, just at the end of last year, the Cabinet Office sent out a letter to returning officers to say that this should be allowed to take place. But it wasn't binding, and there is mixed evidence across the country to show that in some places it didn't happen. Many people with sight loss use mobile phones to read documents audibly or visibly, or carry pocket-sized video magnifiers to help them read. The RNIB have argued for some time that people with sight loss should be allowed to use such tools in the polling booth to help them read the options on the ballot paper. Clearly, they still can't photograph it, and that would still be a criminal offence. This amendment would be particularly helpful for people with sight loss, as it would remove the reliance on tactical voting device, which, as I mentioned earlier, has been ruled unlawful. And it would help to ensure that more people with sight loss would be able to vote independently and key in secret. Finally, Convener, Amendment 3 is really an enabling amendment which goes to Amendment 1 if it was to be followed, and this would simply allow time provisions to take place. Thank you.
Much, and Jeremy Balfour,
3 amendments.
you move. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Any other members have any comments at the moment? Yes, Jamie Halker-Johnson, please.
Just very, very briefly, just to thank Jeremy Balfour for bringing this. It's obviously a really important issue, and I'll be supporting the amendments in his name.
Okay, thank you very much. And Alexander Stewart.
Yes, and can I also, Convener, commend Jeremy Balfour for the work he's done on this, because it does give hope to individuals who have sight loss or are partially sighted, that they will be respected in this process, and I think that's what we're trying to achieve, and by doing so, that does give it the merit that is required. So I will be supporting.
Thank you very much. And Minister, would you?
Convener, thank you. Let me begin by saying that I'm very much supportive of the underlying intent behind the amendments Mr Balfour has brought forward today. The Government is committed to breaking down barriers to inclusion in our electoral system. However, I'm afraid that there are a number of issues that would prevent me from supporting his amendments. That said, I would commit today to be prepared to consider further with him whether it would be possible to make changes in this area in advance of stage 3. On Amendment 1, a key problem that we have is how the proposals interact with the current system for running pilots of this kind. As we discussed in the previous group, rules for proposing and running pilots are already set out in Section 5 of the Scottish Local Government Elections Act 2002. Under that Act, local authorities propose pilots to Scottish ministers who bring appropriate proposals to the Parliament for approval. The local authority will run the pilot, evaluate it and publish a report on its findings. As a result of Amendments 4 and 5 being agreed today, the Electoral Commission will in future take on the evaluation role in ensuring independent and expert scrutiny of these pilots. I don't think that the Scottish ministers are best placed to run pilots of this type. Local authorities have the statutory responsibility for delivering on elections, and they're best placed to deliver pilots of the type envisaged here. Mr Balfour's amendments raise questions around how pilots should be commissioned and ways in which to require completion by a certain date. I'm happy to consider these points further with him. Whilst requiring the completion of a pilot by the end of 2024 would not at first glance seem unreasonable, such hard and fast deadlines might pose practical problems around the amount of initial work that's required, engagement with stakeholders, impact assessment, testing, proofing, etc., as well as an appropriately rigorous procurement exercise. But I say that to offer background, not in any way to undermine the commitment to work with him to see if we can make some progress in this area in the coming weeks. In order to provide reassurance to Mr Balfour and other members, I'd like to record that the Government has been progressing work in this area over the past months. This approach is focused on what voters with sight loss told us would help them overcome the barriers of the traditional system. After a series of workshops in 2019 with those who face these significant barriers to voting, we're already exploring a prototype solution to enable people with sight loss to cast their votes digitally. It's important to highlight, especially given the concerns about full online voting, that this prototype is not designed as a full end-to-end digital solution and will still produce a ballot paper. The prototype, which is at an early stage of development, will undergo field trials with potential users in late spring or early summer of this year, and I would certainly be happy to invite committee colleagues here today to join me in a session where we can experience using the prototype for ourselves within that time frame. Amendment 3 would commence the provisions introduced in Amendment 1 the day after Royal Assent. That's fairly unusual, and I'm not clear as to why the usual convention of not commencing the provisions within 2 months of Royal Assent should be departed from here. Convener, in summary, although I'm very sympathetic to the underlying intent of Amendment 1, I don't think it sits well with existing powers or would add to the important work that's already in progress. I would therefore ask Jeremy Balfour not to move Amendment 1 and 3, but if pressed to a vote, I would ask that members reject Amendments 1 and 3. Turning to Amendment 2, I appreciate that it's motivated by a desire to promote inclusion. Requiring guidance for returning officers on appropriate tools to voters with sight loss is a laudable aim. Basic guidance on this topic, as we've heard, was issued by the Electoral Commission during the 2019 UK general election, and I know the Commission are open to further discussion on the best way to share that guidance. Unfortunately, as it's drafted, the provisions take us out with the powers of the Scottish Parliament. That's because the duty to be imposed on the Electoral Commission by the amendment would be a change for the whole of the UK rather than just Scottish devolved elections. But as I've said, I am supportive of the fundamental idea being considered here, and I'm happy to engage further with Mr Balfour. I would therefore invite him not to move Amendment 2, but if pressed to a vote, I would ask members to reject Amendment 2.
Thank you very much, Minister. Jeremy Balfour, to wind up. And
very briefly, can I first of all thank the Minister for his remarks this morning. I think they are helpful, and I think in many ways deal with some of the issues that I have raised in this. I suppose with regard to particular Amendment 1, there is a concern amongst some that obviously governments come and go and ministers come and go, and I have no doubt that Mr Day and his government are very happy to push forward with this, but other governments may come and be less keen, and I think the area around this is just putting an appropriate time scale in place so that people are not waiting forever. However, having...
Will a member give way?
Absolutely.
I thank Jeremy for giving way. Can I just ask, are there any jurisdictions where there is best practice in the field of making blind people feel that they're more included in the voting system that we can learn from?
I'm not an expert on this. I mean, I do think we have gone a long way as a country and as a nation on this, so I'm not able to answer that one specific. However, I was just going to conclude by saying I would welcome further dialogue with the Minister and his team over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And in the light of his comments, I will be withdrawing all 3 of my amendments and not placing them to a vote this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr Balfour. Jeremy Balfour seeks to withdraw Amendment number 1. Does any member object? Amendment 1 is withdrawn. Okay, thank you. The question is that sections 7 and 9... 7 to 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, section 10, calling Amendment 6 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 7, 8 and 9. Minister to move Amendment 6 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
Thank you, Convener. Amendments 6 to 9 are somewhat technical in nature and are brought forward at the request of the Electoral Commission. The Political Parties, Elections and Referendums Act 2000 requires the Commission to prepare specific codes for observers at Scottish local government elections, covering the applications process to be accredited, what processes may be observed, and the conduct and rights of observers. The codes are of value not only to observers but also to electoral professionals who must accommodate them in polling stations and at counts. The Reform Bill as drafted extends the duty on the Commission to cover Scottish parliamentary elections and by-elections. This is one of a number of provisions in the bill cementing the Electoral Commission's place on the Scottish electoral landscape. The Electoral Commission have highlighted that there are no significant differences between observing at different electoral events, so there is no need for different codes for local government and the Scottish Parliament. The amendments therefore seek to remove any need for separate codes to be produced for local government and Scottish Parliament elections. These codes must be taken through a set process which includes consultation with Scottish ministers and the laying of the code before the Parliament and publication, so the change will avoid duplication of effort. This change is consistent with provisions for referendums and with the approach in England and Wales also. So, Convener, I move Amendment 6 and invite members to support Amendments 6 to 9.
Are there any other members with any questions? We don't have. Minister, do you have anything further to say?
Nothing further, Convener.
You do not. And the question is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. So calling Amendment 7 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 6. Minister to move formally.
Moved formally, Convener.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Calling Amendment 8 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 6. Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Calling Amendment 9 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 6. Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. The question is that Section 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And the question, therefore, is that Section 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Calling Amendment number 2 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 1. I think, Mr Balfour.
Not moving.
Not moved. Thank you very much. Yep. And the question is that Sections 12 and 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, calling Amendment 10 in the name of the Minister, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Minister to move Amendment 10 and speak to all amendments in the group. Please, Minister. Thank you.
Convener, thank you. Members will recall that when I gave evidence at stage 1, that there was a discussion around progress in reaching agreement with the Scottish Parliament and the role that it was to be taking as a consequence in terms of oversight of elections and the work of the Electoral Commission's activities, and how that would all come together. And there were questions asked about reaching agreement that suited all parties. So in the intervening period, there's been extensive discussion taking place with the Parliament, and these amendments are a consequence of those discussions. Amendments 10 to 19 make a number of improvements to the Bill's provisions, granting the Scottish Parliament an oversight role in relation to the Electoral Commission's activities concerning Scottish devolved elections. The bill means that the Commission will be funded by and accountable to the Scottish Parliamentary corporate body for the work that it carries out in relation to devolved elections. We've been discussing how best to make these arrangements work effectively with officials from both the Scottish Parliament and the Electoral Commission. Amendments 10 and 11 clarify that the Parliament will only be obliged to reimburse the Commission in relation to expenditure that is properly incurred, and that has been covered by an estimate or a revised estimate approved by the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body. However, the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body may reimburse any expenditure not covered by such estimates at its discretion. Amendments 12 to 15 relate to the date by which the Commission is required to send an estimate of its income and expenditure for each financial year to the corporate body. Parliament officials have asked for discretion to vary the date that estimates should be sent. The amendments enable the corporate body to determine this date. Amendments 16 and 17 address the requirement for Electoral Commission income and expenditure to be consistent with the economical, efficient and effective exercise of its Scottish devolved functions. The bill currently requires this to be confirmed by the SPCB, but we've agreed with the Commission and Parliamentary officials that the duty should be placed on the Commission instead. That's consistent with the approach taken in the Scottish Parliamentary Commissions and Commissioners Act 2010, which established the Commission for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. The Electoral Commission's activities are subject to the existing audit requirements in the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act 2000. Amendments 18 and 19 remove sections 17 and 18 respectively. These sections had sought to set out audit arrangements to assist the SPCB in the exercise of its duties under the bill. Further discussion with Audit Scotland and the Auditor General has resulted in the conclusion that these provisions are not necessary to enable the auditing of the Electoral Commission's devolved responsibilities, and that the existing audit arrangements are sufficient. So, Convener, I move Amendment 10 and invite members to support Amendments 10 to 19.
Thank you very much, Minister. Anyone have any questions? Well, that leaves us then to ask the Minister if you'd like to wind up any further.
Nothing, Convener.
Nothing at the moment. Okay, thank you. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Okay, and now we're going to call Amendments 11 to 17, following on, all in the name of the Minister and all previously debated with Amendment 10. Minister, can I ask if you will move Amendments 11 to 17 on block, please?
Moved on block, Convener.
Thank you very much. Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 11 to 17? Yep. Thank you. No member objects. Therefore, the question is that Amendments 11 to 17 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. The question is that Section 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. The question is that Sections 15 and 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So we move on to Section 17, calling Amendment 18 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 10. Minister, to move formally?
Moved, Convener.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. So I'm calling Amendment 19 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 10. Minister, to move formally, please.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you. So the question is that Amendment 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. And the question is that Sections 19 to 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, and the question is that the schedule be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So, Section 29 and timings of reviews of the Boundary Commission. Calling Amendment 20 in the name of the Minister, group with Amendment 21. Minister, to move Amendment 20 and speak to all amendments in the group, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. In the Stage 1 report from the Committee on the Reform Bill, the Committee expressed support for review periods of 15 years for local government boundary reviews, subject to the introduction of 5-year terms being retained in the bill. After a very productive engagement with the Local Government Boundary Commission for Scotland, which of course will soon be known as Boundary Scotland, I'm in agreement with the committee's recommendation. This move under Amendment 20 will give Boundary Scotland the time to balance careful consideration of local communities and the stability of recognisable boundaries. 15 years should be sufficient time to ensure measured proposals for boundaries in each local government area can be put in place. Moving to 15-year cycles will also improve the Bill's proposal of rolling reviews for local government areas, allowing greater time to consider specific areas that require attention. It had been suggested that a move to 5-year terms should also lead to the period for Scottish Parliament boundaries to be changed. I don't feel that the case has been made there. There are important differences, not least that a review of Scottish parliamentary boundaries would always be undertaken as a single event. I am, however, convinced of the need to move the deadline for Scottish Parliament reviews set out in the bill to 2025 rather than 2024 as drafted. Amendment 21 makes this small but important change. This will allow Boundary Scotland to submit their proposals 12 months before the Scottish Parliament election in 2026, ensuring that they have access to the most recent and relevant data to inform their recommendations. I hope members will support these amendments, which were requested by the Local Government Boundary Commission. Convener, I move amendments 20 and 21 in my name.
Thank you very much. And any members have anything to bring forward? No, we don't have. So, Minister, anything further to wind up?
Further, Convener.
Further. Thank you very much. So the question is Amendment 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And the question, therefore, is that Section 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Okay. The question is that Sections 30 and 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. That moves us on to Section 32. Call Amendment 21 in the name of the Minister already debated with Amendment 20. Minister to move formally.
Moved, Convener.
Thank you very much. And the question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And the question, therefore, is that Section 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that Sections 33 and 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Okay, Section 35 then, and call Amendment 3 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated. Jeremy Balfour.
Withdrawn, Convener.
Withdrawn. Thank you very much, sir. And not moved. Thank you very much. That's fine. Thanks very much. The question, therefore, is that Section 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that Section 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? And the question is that the long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Well, thank you. That ends Stage 2 consideration of the bill, and that brings us to an end of the public part of the meeting. And I would like to thank the Minister and his officials for attending, and Jeremy Balfour also. Thank you very much. So we're moving into private session. Thank you very much.